morning, church. Pastor Ben here again with your daily Devo. Thank you so much for joining us today. In my last video, I introduced the idea of basic principles. And so I got this from our ABCs of leadership. When we got to G, we said we should be grounded in basic principles, or put first things first. And so what are those basic principles for the Christian? What are some really important things that we need to understand and put in our minds to help us learn how to live the Christian life in a better way? And I told you that I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about the image of God. So this answers a question that goes right to the heart of our existence. What does it mean biblically, in the biblical worldview, what does it mean to be a human being? Well, the best way to answer that question is to look and see what happened when human beings were created in the first pages of the Bible. And what we find there is this really difficult to understand statement that the man and woman were made in the image of God. And then it says that they were to rule in his stead and subdue the earth. The word there is like domesticate. So what is going on with that? In the ancient world, there were a couple of things that would go on with this whole idea of image. One is that a king who ruled over a wide territory would go into a conquered city and erect an image of himself. And that image was supposed to represent the king to the people. Since the king couldn't be there, then that image would say, "This is my territory, I'm your king." So in some way, shape, or form, that's one thing humans are. We are to be representatives of our king, our Heavenly Father. The other thing that they would do in the ancient world is they would build a temple and plant a garden next to it. Then they would put the image in the temple, and then the priest would be in charge of taking care of the garden and the temple grounds. Now that sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? That sounds an awfully lot like chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis. And I think that's exactly what's going on there. That is supposed to conjure up in us this idea of a temple complex. That here's a garden that's been planted, and instead of putting a statue in a temple, you put human beings in the garden as images of the God who is in his temple in heaven. So it's an interesting idea, isn't it? That somehow or another, by being the images of God and being given the rule, and this whole idea of the priest taking care of the temple grounds, this is all rolled up into one, and it's mixed up with this big salvo of ideas and images and thoughts and metaphor to explain to us what it means to be a human being. And then the first thing that Adam does, or that God has Adam do, is he names all the animals. Now, again, in the ancient world, when you name something, you own it. It's an act of sovereignty. It's an act of ruling to name something. You may remember that in the book of Daniel and his friends all get new names from Nebuchadnezzar. In the book of Revelation, Jesus says, the book says, the writer says that Jesus will give us all our new name, that we will get a new name. This is very important in the biblical imagination. So now we have this picture drawn of Adam being placed in the temple garden to act as a priest or a representative or an image of the heavenly king or God to the creation that God has just created, to the world that God has just created. And Adam and Eve are supposed to rule or subdue or domesticate this world. They're to tend the garden. They're to take care of it. They're maybe to spread the garden. They're to use their creativity to create new things. They're to have children and multiply and develop communities. In other words, they're supposed to be humans. They're supposed to do what humans are designed to do, which is to create, build, spread, domesticate. So I look at this plant behind me here. That's an act of being the image of God, to subdue or tame that plant in my home. To build houses, to build railroads, to build airplanes, to fly to the moon. All of these things were what God had wanted humans to do, to take this creation that he had just created, this world that he had just created, harness all that energy and potential for the good of others, for the good of that world, of the other creatures in that world, and eventually of other humans, and to look out for each other. So, the takeaway for you today is to understand how important you are to God. That God created each and every human being to be in his image, and that functions in so many ways, such a variety of ways. And so you may think that tending to your yard or taking care of your flower garden or taking care of your house is just part of living, and it is just part of living, but it's an important part of living. It's what it means to be a human being, to take care of the things around you. That includes the people around you, the animals around you, the plants and trees around you, everything that exists around you that you have subdued or domesticated or tamed. That's the activity of God. That's the activity of the image of God. That is the act of rule, or an act of having authority over something. And you see so often people who have abandoned this, have abandoned this idea, that have fallen into some decay or destruction or death. That's one of the things that goes out the window. They don't take care of themselves. They don't take care of their environment. They don't take care of their homes because they've been distracted by something else. So that's our first basic principle. You and those around you are all made in the image of God. Take some time today to meditate on that. What does that mean in my life for me to be given the charge of representing God to the world and taking care of the world that God has created? Thank you so much for your time. Keep being the church.